Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are undertaking a really fundamental investigation. We're going deep into the operating system of the mind.
Yeah, we're trying to understand how our greatest strength, our brain, is also, the source of our most predictable errors.
Our most predictable flaws.
That's right. For this deep dive, we're really examining the foundations of human error, based heavily on the work of Dr. Stephen Novella. We're looking at cognitive vulnerabilities, at the necessity of critical thinking.
And we're confronting a paradox, aren't we? I mean, a pretty profound one.
It's huge. We rely completely on our brains to interpret reality.
Right, for everything.
But those very brains are, well, they're inherently unreliable. They weren't designed for strict logical accuracy. They were designed for survival.
Quick survival in an ancestral environment.
Yeah.
And to really set the stage for this, we have to talk about the ultimate cautionary tale.
Oh, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
The ultimate contradiction, right? He created Sherlock Holmes, who is the absolute epitome of the hyper-rational detective.
Pure objective logic, synthesizing these tiny random details into, a perfect deduction.
And yet the very man who championed that level of rationality in his own life, he became a fervent spiritualist.
We passionately believed in mediums, and most famously the Cottingley fairies. He championed them based on this flimsy photographic evidence.
It turned out to be just paper cutouts.
Just paper cutouts in a garden. It's incredible.
It really highlights the problem we all face. If the architect of hyper-rationality can be so completely taken in by what was basically a children's hoax,
then every single one of us needs to question our own mechanisms for belief.
absolutely. The sheer power of emotional attachment, the motivation to believe something, it can just override even the sharpest intellect.
Precisely. And that's why our mission today is to provide you with a kind of scientific guide to metacognition.
Thinking about thinking.
Exactly. We have to understand the neurological vulnerabilities that cause us to make these predictable errors again and again. So by exploring these 8 core flaws, we can start to apply a necessary filter.
The filter of scientific skepticism.
That's the one.
Okay, so let's unpack the first big realization, which is, honestly, it's a bit shocking. The default setting for the human mind is not to seek objective truth.
No. We are, at our core, belief machines.
We're just programmed to believe. Especially, I guess, what we want to believe.
And we need to understand the neuroanatomy here. We're basically operating on 2 primary systems.
Oh.
First, you have the intuitive, primitive, or emotional system. It's the faster one, the older one.
And then there's the analytical system.
Right, the slower, more deliberate processing in the neocortex, the frontal lobes.
And the problem is, evolution kind of gave the intuitive system the steering wheel.
It had to, because that system is crucial for immediate survival. It's a quick emotional calculus for motivation. It's just far more efficient than calculation.
So like avoiding bad food.
Perfect example. Feeling disgust at rotting meat is instantaneous. It compels you to reject the food right now.
You don't stop to analyze the bacterial load?
No, you'd be dead. Calculating the risk of toxins takes way too long. The disgust saves your life.
Same with danger. You don't stand there and calculate the speed and trajectory of a lion running at you.
You experience instant fear. It triggers fight or flight, and you're moving before your conscious thought has even really registered the details. The intuitive system is all about speed and action.
Which means our subconscious often gets there way before our conscious reason.
And this is where the neuroscience just provides this humbling evidence about our own conscious awareness.
You're talking about that fMRI study from 2008 in Nature.
That's the one. Researchers watched brain activity while people were making simple choices, like pushing one of 2 buttons. They found a consistent pattern. The decision, the neural activity to show which button would be pushed, was evident in the brain up to 10 seconds before the person was consciously aware they'd even made the decision.
10 seconds. That is an incredible gap.
Massive.
It completely challenges our idea of free will, at least in that moment-to-moment sense. It suggests that for a lot of our choices, the outcome is decided subconsciously, long before we feel like we're choosing.
It really speaks to the illusion of the conscious self. Our experience is that we're a central boss, a CEO in our head issuing commands.
Yeah.
But the research suggests consciousness is more like the combined behavior of a bunch of independent committee members, different brain regions, all operating semi-autonomously.
So you might feel intense apprehension about someone's body language without being able to consciously explain why.
Exactly. The intuition, the emotional context, the social cues, they all operate subconsciously.
So if the primitive parts of the brain are making these fast, emotionally charged decisions, What's left for our highly evolved frontal lobe, the part that's supposed to be for restraint and long-term planning?
Well, its function often shifts from being the decision maker to being the rationalizer,
The defense lawyer.
a very powerful defense lawyer for decisions that have already been made. Think about impulse buying or eating something you know you shouldn't.
The cheesecake?
The cheesecake. The primitive reward centers drive that instant decision. Eat the cheesecake.
Mm.
The frontal lobe often just steps in afterward to invent plausible, logical-sounding reasons why eating the cheesecake right now was actually a totally sound choice.
I've had a hard day. I deserve it.
I'll work it off tomorrow.
Ah.
It constructs a whole narrative of deliberate choice where there was really just an impulse.
And this rationalizing is all tied up with our need for self-esteem, for consistency. We're motivated to see the world in a way that's good for our own ego.
Absolutely. We're always seeking psychological comfort, and nothing is more uncomfortable than cognitive dissonance.
That's the mental friction, right? When you hold two conflicting beliefs, or when your beliefs just smash up against reality.
Exactly. And the brain is highly motivated to resolve that conflict as quickly as possible.
And usually the easiest way to do that isn't to change your cherished belief.
No, it's to rationalize reality away. The classic example is when doomsday prophecies fail.
Right. The cult believes the world will end on Tuesday. Wednesday morning comes.
And they're faced with this profound dissonance. But instead of admitting the prophet was wrong, they rationalize the failure.
So they say something like, our faith prevented the apocalypse.
Or the prediction was fulfilled spiritually. They do whatever it takes to maintain and often even strengthen the original belief. The need for that internal consistency is a massive driver of confirmation bias.
So we're not really seeking truth. We're seeking certainty. We're seeking consistency inside our existing worldview.
And that search for certainty leads us straight to the second major flaw. The human brain is a hyperactive and, frankly, indiscriminate pattern detector.
This is a double-edged sword, though. It's the source of all genius, scientific and artistic.
But it is also a fundamental cognitive weakness because we find patterns even when they are not real. Our brains are just wired to assign meaning and emotion to patterns, even totally random ones.
Spotting a camouflaged predator in the grass was life-saving. But now that same function finds a face in an electrical outlet.
And that phenomenon is called pareidolia, seeing significant, meaningful patterns where none actually exist.
So faces in clouds, voices and static religious figures on a piece of toast?
It's the brain just imposing structure onto chaos. And what's really crucial here is that once the brain successfully imposes that pattern, once it clicks into place, it becomes incredibly hard, sometimes impossible, to unsee it.
Why is that?
Because the brain has built a compelling model. It's now more energy efficient to just run reality through that established model than to constantly reevaluate the raw data as random noise. The failure isn't the detection, it's the failure of the reality testing filter to say, hey, that pattern is just a product of chance.
And this failure leads us to consistently confuse coincidence with causation. This is the lottery fallacy.
The lottery fallacy happens because we ask the wrong question. When something improbable happens, we ask, what are the odds that this specific thing would happen?
And the answer is always astronomically low.
Always. So our brain concludes it must be fate, it must be design, it has to mean something.
But the correct question is totally different.
It's, what are the odds that any coincidence, any statistically improbable event would happen to someone, somewhere, given the billions of events happening every second?
And the answer to that is very high.
Very high. The law of large numbers dictates it. 1,000,000 to 1 event is guaranteed to happen multiple times a day in a big city. Coincidences are just statistically inevitable. They're not proof of anything deeper.
You see this a lot with fringe researchers who just engage in massive data mining.
Oh, yeah. They're looking for any correlation between any two things. A researcher might mine decades of insurance tables looking for a pattern and find that, people born in August are statistically more likely to have a specific type of accident.
But it's just noise.
It's just noise. They weren't testing a hypothesis. They were just mining a huge data set until some spurious, meaningless pattern popped out.
And compounding all this is our tendency towards agency detection.
Right. Our brain has these specialized structures to distinguish between things that have agency intent, motives like people or animals, and things that don't, like rocks.
And evolutionarily, it makes sense to err on the side of caution.
It's far safer to mistake a rustling bush for a tiger than to mistake a tiger for a rustling bush. So this hyperactive agency detection is why we attribute intent to things. We say the weather hates our picnic plans, or that our computer chose to crash at the worst possible moment.
And this is a direct line to magical thinking.
It is. Magical thinking is basically imbuing inanimate objects with an essence or a soul. The classic example is the child who refuses a perfect replica of their favorite stuffed animal.
Because the original is special. It has a unique essence.
It's an agent, it's a friend, the copy is just an object, that original is irreplaceable.
And when you scale this up, it becomes conspiracy thinking.
Exactly. When we see a compelling high-stakes pattern of events, a war, an assassination, a pandemic, our pattern-detecting brain, with its agency detection module, just rebels against the idea of random chance or complexity.
It feels like there has to be an invisible hand behind it.
It must. A deliberate agent, a secret group pulling the strings. The cognitive impulse is to assume malice or intent, rather than just incompetence or random factors or sheer messy complexity.
So if patterns are one area where our brains deceive us, numbers are where they just completely fail us.
Right.
Which brings us to numeracy.
Our innate weakness with statistics, with probability, with large numbers.
It makes sense from an evolutionary context, right?
Yeah.
Our ancestors needed to know small numbers counting enemies, maybe up to 5 or 6.
Right. But anything beyond that is abstract. It's handled by cultural tools like mathematics. Our gut intuition is just utterly broken when it comes to statistics.
And that leads directly to the clustering illusion.
Yeah, the clustering illusion comes from our inability to intuitively grasp statistical variation. Random events, when you plot them out, they don't distribute perfectly evenly. You get clumps, you get clusters.
So a basketball player hits a hot streak, or you see a scary number of cancer cases in one small neighborhood.
And when we see that cluster, our hard wiring screams that it must be real. It can't possibly be a statistical fluke.
It's so hard to shake that personal, intuitive feeling.
Incredibly hard. You see it in public health all the time. The CDC investigates reported clusters constantly, and the vast majority turn out to be purely statistical noise. But because the cluster feels so real, so compelling, the personal belief that something must be causing it just persists long after the science has dismissed it.
And of course, casinos are literally built to exploit the most famous probability flaw, the gambler's fallacy.
The belief that past random events influence future ones. If you're watching a roulette wheel and it's landed on black 10 times in a row,
Every bone in your body screams red is due.
but the wheel has no memory, the chance of red is still 50-50, assuming it's a fair wheel.
Our mind wants to see balance. It wants to see a pattern where there's just randomness.
Exactly. We assume a long sequence of one outcome has to be corrected by the universe. Our intuition imposes a pattern of fairness onto pure chance.
We also misuse statistics when a description seems really compelling.
That's the base rate fallacy. It's when a descriptive profile completely overrides the actual statistical prevalence, the base rate.
So if you describe someone as quiet, loves puzzles, good with mechanics,
And then I ask if it's more probable they're an engineer or, say, a librarian, you'll probably say engineer
okay.
because the profile is representative.
Even if I told you that in the sample group, there are 100 times more librarians than engineers.
The story, the description, it just overrides the boring statistics. And the conjunction fallacy is even more counterintuitive. This is where we assume that specific conditions are more probable than a single general one.
The famous Linda the bank teller experiment.
Right. Subjects are told about Linda. She's single, outspoken, bright, a philosophy major concerned with social justice. Then they're asked which is more probable. A, Linda is a bank teller, or B, Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement.
And most people pick B. It just fits the profile so much better.
But mathematically, the probability of A alone must always be greater than or equal to the probability of A and B. You can't increase probability by adding another condition. It's impossible. But the representative profile is so compelling that our intuition tricks us into choosing the impossible option.
And finally, let's go back to our inability to grasp exponential scales. Geometric progression blindness.
This is just our cognitive limit with large numbers. We understand linear growth, but we dramatically, grossly underestimate exponential growth. Let's go back to the classic paper folding example.
Okay, a thin sheet of newspaper.
You fold it in half.
Yeah.
Then you fold it again. And again, the growth rate just accelerates so fast, the thickness becomes unimaginable.
And 30 folds feels like a pretty small number of actions.
It does. But after 30 folds, that stack of paper is 54 kilometers, or 34 miles thick.
34 miles.
In 30 simple steps, you've reached the stratosphere. Our brains just cannot process that intuitively. We see the number 30 and we assume a straight line, which is why we're so consistently terrible at understanding everything from population growth to compound interest.
So if the outside world is unreliable because of our pattern detection and our numeracy, the ultimate deception really comes from within. From our own internal history, we have this illusion of the tape recorder. We think our memories are perfect recordings.
And that is just fundamentally wrong. Memories are not passively stored. They're actively constructed and reconstructed every single time we recall them.
So they're part of a continuous story we're always editing.
Every act of recall is an act of updating. You integrate everything you've learned, everything you've felt, everything you've been told since the last time you remember that event, and this leads to memory contamination.
Where details are unconsciously altered to fit the current story.
We want a coherent personal history, even if that means bending the facts a little to make it all fit together.
And this leads to a really dangerous disconnect. A memory that is vivid and detailed feels incredibly certain, but that certainty has nothing to do with accuracy.
This is a huge vulnerability, especially in the legal system. A highly vivid, detailed memory dramatically increases the subjective confidence of a witness. They feel absolutely sure they're correct.
But the research shows otherwise.
Consistently. Subjective confidence does not reliably correlate with objective accuracy. In many studies, highly confident witnesses have zero accuracy on specific details. Overall familiarity with a scene correlates better with accuracy than detail recall does.
So sincerity is totally irrelevant to reliability.
Absolutely. The person genuinely believes the invented or modified details. The work of Elizabeth Loftus just perfectly showed how easily this contamination happens.
She used leading questions to manipulate memories.
Yes. In her studies, subjects would watch a video of an event. Afterwards, the researchers would ask leading questions, sometimes putting in details that were totally false, like what was the woman in the blue dress doing when there was no woman in a blue dress?
And the subjects would then remember her.
They'd incorporate the suggestion, they'd describe her clothes, her actions, sincerely believing they had seen her in the original video. And this extends to confabulation.
Which is when the brain just invents details to fill in the gaps.
It creates a seamless narrative. It's not lying. It's the brain's automatic story creation system just running constantly, just like it stitches your vision together every time you blink.
Which is why eyewitness testimony is so notoriously unreliable, especially in high-stress situations.
And the problem gets amplified in social settings. If 3 people witness an event and then talk about it,
They contaminate each other's accounts.
immediately they start incorporating each other's details and suggestions, and you end up with 3 consistent, vivid, but ultimately synthesized accounts that have drifted dramatically from the truth.
And the real-world implications of this led to the tragic episode of the false memory syndrome epidemic.
That emerged in the late 80s, really fueled by self-help books like The Courage to Heal.
Right. And the premise of that book was that your current life issues were probably caused by repressed memories of childhood abuse.
An unproven premise. And therapists, believing this, would encourage clients to imagine the details of abuse or prompt them with leading questions.
Which is basically a recipe for creating false memories on a huge scale.
It's a prescription for confabulation. This process manufactured thousands of vivid, detailed, but completely fabricated memories. And it led to enormous personal trauma, families torn apart, people imprisoned based solely on these vivid, sincerely held, but manufactured accounts.
The lesson is just paramount. We have to prioritize reliable external evidence over the sheer sincerity or confidence with which a memory is held.
It has to be that way.
So if memory is a flawed reconstruction of the past, then our perception, what we experience right now, is the flawed first draft.
Yeah. We have to accept that perception is not objective reality reaching our brain. It's a story constructed inside the brain to make sense of all the incoming data.
And the brain is constantly editing and synthesizing that data to make it congruent if the senses contradict each other.
The brain prioritizes the sense it trusts most, usually vision, and it alters the other senses to match. This leads to these fascinating cross-sensory illusions.
Like the McGurk effect.
The McGurk effect is the most powerful example. If a person is saying the sound "ba," but their lips are visually manipulated to look like they're saying "fa,"
Your brain creates a third sound to resolve the conflict.
right? You might hear "da" or "va." What you perceive acoustically is dramatically altered by what you see. Your brain is also constructing the illusion of synchronization, making it seem like sight and sound are simultaneous, even though they're processed at different speeds.
It's a master editor. But to manage the flood of sensory input, it also has to filter our attention.
We're just bombarded with data. So we filter out what the brain decides is irrelevant to whatever task we're doing. And this efficiency mechanism is what stage magicians exploit. It's called inattentional blindness.
The famous gorilla suit experiment is still the most devastating demonstration of this.
It really is. Subjects are told to focus intently on counting how many times basketball players pass a ball. And because their attention is so dedicated to that task.
About 60% of people completely miss the person in a full gorilla suit who walks right through the middle of the scene.
Waves at the camera and walks off. The brain, deeming the gorilla irrelevant to ball counting, just filters the image out. It's not perceived.
And this is related to, but different from, change blindness, our inability to notice really dramatic changes in our environment.
Change blindness is arguably even more startling. There are experiments where a subject is talking to a stranger, asking for directions, and during a brief natural distraction, like two people walking by carrying a door.
The person they're talking to is switched out for an entirely different person.
An entirely different person.
And the subject doesn't notice.
In about 60% of cases, they fail to notice. They're now speaking to someone with different clothes, different height, a different voice. It reveals that perception is fundamentally a top-down process.
Our brain weaves this continuous, congruent reality.
And once it has the initial narrative, I am talking to this person, it uses that prior belief to interpret what's coming in, assuming consistency and just ignoring radical change unless it's forced to reevaluate.
So since accuracy is slow and it's energy intensive, the brain relies on a whole battery of heuristics, mental shortcuts.
They're essential for daily functioning. They're first approximations of the truth that prioritize efficiency. But every single shortcut introduces a predictable distortion.
And this is the field of behavioral economics, right? Tversky and Kahneman.
They map these distortions, and one of the most powerful is the anchoring heuristic.
We focus on one prominent, often irrelevant, initial piece of information to make all our subsequent judgments.
The famous example involved asking people to estimate the percentage of African nations in the UN. They spun a rigged wheel that landed on either 10% or 60%.
So they'd ask one group, is it more or less than 10?
And their average final estimate was 25%. Then they asked the other group, is it more or less than 60? Their average shot up to 45%. The completely arbitrary initial anchor profoundly biased the final answer.
This is used constantly in negotiation. The seller throws out a crazy high price to anchor the whole discussion.
Exactly. And it's also why marketers use the leftmost digit bias, pricing something at $19.95 instead of $20. We anchor on that first digit, the 1, and it disproportionately affects how we assess the cost.
Then there's the reliance on what's easiest to recall, the availability heuristic.
We assume something is commonplace and high risk just because examples are readily available in our memory, usually because they were sensationalized or emotionally charged.
So plane crashes and shark attacks.
We vastly overestimate their statistical probability compared to common but mundane risks, like car accidents.
And the representativeness heuristic is this massive failure of causal logic, where we assume that effects have to resemble their causes.
It creates these profound conceptual errors. It's why people instinctively reject the lone nut theory for a presidential assassination. A huge world-changing event. The effect feels like it must have an equally huge cause, like a deep conspiracy.
The scale has to match.
The scale has to match, intuitively. And this belief system is the direct foundation for sympathetic magic.
The idea that, cures like.
Absolutely. The basis of homeopathy or the historical use of, say, a plant that looks like a liver to treat liver disease. The intuitive resemblance just overrides any need for scientific plausibility.
And finally, we have the biases that lock us into past decisions.
Escalation of commitment. We become overly influenced by the investment we've already sunk into a decision, the time, the money. So we throw good money after bad.
You keep pursuing a failing project just because you've already invested so much in it?
Instead of admitting the initial investment was a mistake and just moving on. And then after we've made a decision, we rely on the choice-supportive bias.
To maintain our consistency and self-esteem.
Once we choose option A, we rationalize it after the fact by boosting our positive assessment of A, and at the same time, downgrading the positive qualities of all the options we rejected. It just shores up the story that we made the perfect rational choice.
So all of these flaws, they really culminate in what's called motivated reasoning.
This is the point where emotion and identity and tribal affiliation just completely override any impartial evaluation of evidence. We are rationalizing conclusions we wish were true.
Not the ones that are actually supported by the data. And this is where we get to that ironic realization that really intelligent people aren't necessarily better at making decisions.
No, but they're often significantly better at rationalizing the decisions they've already made. Their frontal lobe is just a more sophisticated tool for defending the emotional conclusions that were reached by their primitive systems.
The logic is built to serve the conclusion, not to find the truth.
Exactly. Let's use the fundamental attribution error as an example. It's our need to be kind to ourselves. Imagine you're driving and you accidentally cut someone off. You rationalize your behavior with external causes. I'm late. The sun was in my eyes.
Right.
Now imagine someone else cuts you off. You immediately attribute their behavior to internal flaws. That person is selfish, aggressive, a terrible driver.
We excuse ourselves with circumstances. We condemn others with character judgments.
That's the error in a nutshell. And our motivation to belong to a group leads to pigeonholing and stereotyping.
Because it's easier.
We are motivated to oversimplify complex data, especially when dealing with rival groups. Complex reality is cognitively taxing. Simple schematics reinforce our tribal identity.
And motivated reasoning gives us the tools to protect our cherished beliefs. Things like compartmentalization and special pleading.
Compartmentalization is where you wall off a belief to insulate it from being refuted. You hold a belief in one box and all the contradictory evidence in another, and you just refuse to let them interact.
And
That's when you invent reasons after the fact to resolve conflicts. For example, if a miracle cure doesn't work for your friend, you invent special reasons why it didn't work for them. They didn't do it right, their energy was blocked, rather than concluding the cure itself is just ineffective.
And this all leads to the ultimate closed loop, grand conspiracy thinking.
Conspiracy thinking provides this powerful illusion of certainty and control in what can feel like a chaotic world. But it becomes immune to being proven wrong.
Because any contradictory evidence
Is just cast through a sinister filter. The evidence against the conspiracy just proves how powerful and extensive the conspiracy must be. The belief system is perfectly self-sealing.
So the goal isn't just to be smart. It's to develop the emotional intelligence to recognize when our motivations are driving what we think is our rationality.
Exactly. We have to consciously use our frontal lobe to restrain and evaluate those primitive impulses instead of letting it just be the best lawyer for a flawed emotional conclusion. That's what Arthur Conan Doyle failed to do. He understood rationality in theory, but he couldn't apply it to his own personal, highly motivated beliefs.
It requires constant self-reflection. Okay, so if our default setting is just bias and self-deception, the only corrective is to consciously engage our higher brain functions as a filter. This brings us to scientific skepticism.
Skepticism is so often misunderstood as just being cynical or negative. It's not. It is systematic doubt. It's a methodology for rigorously questioning everything we think we know and for critically evaluating the very process of our own reasoning.
So the goal is to arrive at conclusions that are likely to be true and to understand how reliable those conclusions are.
And their provisional nature. And science gives us the structured rules for that reality check, starting with its core assumption, methodological naturalism.
Which is just the idea that natural effects have natural causes.
We assume the universe is knowable, predictable, measurable. And crucially, science cannot invoke supernatural or miraculous causes. Not because we're saying they don't exist, but because they were inherently untestable and unfalsifiable. You can't measure them, you can't control them, so they just fall outside the domain of scientific inquiry.
And the most important rule for separating reliable ideas from just wishful thinking is falsification.
A truly scientific theory must, by definition, be able to be proven wrong. The process requires that you actively try with maximum rigor to disprove your own theory first.
You're trying to break your own idea.
A theory only gains provisional acceptance after it has survived multiple concerted attempts to falsify it. Pseudoscience only ever looks for confirmation.
And the line between testable and untestable often comes down to the burden of proof.
The burden of proof lies squarely with the person making the positive claim. Bertrand Russell's teapot analogy is perfect for this.
If I claim there's an unobservable, tiny teapot orbiting the sun between Earth and Mars,
you can't disprove it. But your inability to disprove my claim is never, ever a justification for believing it. If a claim is unfalsifiable, or if it rests on an argument from ignorance, we don't know what caused X, therefore it must be Y, it's not scientifically supported.
we're often taught to reject the argument from authority as a logical fallacy, but we have to rely on expertise in modern life. How do we square that?
The argument from authority is a fallacy. if the conclusion has to be true just because an authority figure says it is. However, we should place great value on expert consensus.
As long as that consensus comes from a robust, transparent program of research and replication.
Exactly. Consensus is built over time. It compensates for individual biases and leads to more reliable, well-tested models.
Richard Muller's study on climate change is the ideal example of how this works.
Muller was an established physicist and a prominent skeptic of the global warming consensus. He set out with his own team and a transparent methodology to disprove the existing data.
And what happened?
After years of work, using his own rigorous analysis, he replicated the findings. He was forced to accept the scientific consensus. The planet is unequivocally warming. The data won out over his initial preconceptions. That's how scientific consensus is supposed to work.
But even the greatest experts are still susceptible to all these human flaws.
Absolutely. Lord Kelvin, a brilliant physicist, dismissed geology because his physics calculations underestimated the Earth's age. He didn't know about radioactivity. Einstein added the cosmological constant to force his equations to fit his idea of a static universe, and later called it his biggest blunder.
And Linus Pauling, a Nobel laureate, promoted megadoses of vitamin C for everything without the evidence.
His expertise in chemistry did not grant him expertise in clinical medicine.
Which brings us to the final requirement of critical thinking: humility.
We have to be comfortable living with uncertainty. All conclusions in science are provisional models. They're subject to revision when new, falsifying evidence comes along. The ultimate solution to all our cognitive flaws is the conscious, continuous implementation of a metacognitive self-check.
That discipline of using our executive function to inhibit those instant, primitive, emotionally rewarding impulses.
It's a constant process.
So we've systematically covered it. Perception, memory, reasoning, they're all constructed. They're all prone to predictable errors involving probability, patterns, and motivated self-deception.
And the essential takeaway is that we all grossly underestimate our potential for self-deception, even those of us who practice skepticism. The fact that a belief is held with overwhelming sincerity, or that so many people believe it, that doesn't move us 1 inch closer to its truth. We have to look past the emotional attachment.
And knowing about these flaws is what ultimately puts you in the driver's seat of your own beliefs, provided you put in the work.
The ongoing work. That leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to carry with you. When you confront a deeply held belief, your own or someone else's, can you truly separate the sincerity with which it is held from the objective evidence that supports it?
A foundational deep dive into why our minds deceive us and how critical thinking begins with understanding our own cognitive vulnerabilities.